Thank you, everybody. So welcome. We're going to do a panel about surviving the VR winter. At least that's the title that we've come up with. I think we're going to talk about business development, where we're seeing our companies kind of move forward. And first, I just want to have everyone kind of run through and do some quick introductions.
Hello? All right, okay. Yeah, so I've been in business development for video games for around 20 years. I've been in VR for about 2 years. So I'm the business development director for nDreams, and we work across kind of home consumer VR, and also we do some LB VR as well, or location-based out-of-home stuff.
Hello. Okay, works now. I'm Callum. I worked at Oculus for 4 years. I joined when there were about 30 people down in Irvine. I left 2 years ago and now do various VR things, but mostly I work at Superhot as a director of special projects, which is a title I made up myself. It doesn't really mean anything.
Fantastic. And I'll introduce myself. My name is Alex Schwartz, and I founded a company called Owlchemy Labs. We created VR games, Job Simulator, Rick and Morty, Virtual Reality, and Vacation Simulator. And yeah, I'm moving on to a new venture, co-founded with SciWise, and we're in super stealth mode. So,
you didn't mention the best game that Owlchemy made in VR.
Oh yeah. Before that is very true. We built a skydiving game where you jump off a building and fly through a city at high speeds called and then we made the VR version and called that Oculus.
I hated it.
Most of our game designs were based off of a pun that then was delivered into a game. So that's kind of the order of operations for our design process. But I guess first I want to start, I think you kick things off in the right way, talking about the various sectors that are available to people. But I kind of want to talk about how much of your time spent at various companies is on out-of-home versus in-home, and where you think over the next 5 to 10 years, the focus needs to kind of shift as the market changes.
So for Superhot, we found ourselves getting inundated with many emails about tiny amounts of revenue from lots of arcades, to the point where it was impossible to keep track of them all. So it's fine to ignore an email that's for like $20, $10, but if you're ignoring tens or hundreds or thousands of those, it starts to add up. So we hired someone called Alistair to basically run the arcade side of the business at Superhot, which was new for us and definitely, I think, indicative of how arcade has been growing for Superhot. In terms of straight revenue, it's still dwarfed by consumer purchases of Superhot VR on various headsets. But I think arcade it's exciting for two reasons. One is the potential for revenue from people who can't afford the headsets, but also it's very good marketing if you believe in your game as a commercial product, because you're exposing it to the type of people who will pay $5, $10, $15 to go and try VR for 20 minutes. It's very hard to track those sales. I think we saw one Facebook post where someone had bought it, so we got at least one.
Yeah. So you'd say your method for arcade is basically a driving force to get people to buy the consumer home versions?
It was that until recently, and I still think it is, but we rebuilt our entire arcade SKU specifically for arcades. Superhot, if you've not played it, it's a very good game for at-home play. It lasts a couple of hours, there's challenges, but it's a single-player linear game. So for arcades, the arcade owners, you touched on this earlier, they would have to manually restart the game, delete the save file between each, but like, I think for arcades you have to understand that everything is a manual process and someone has to stand there and do all of this. So it's kind of a pain in the ass. So we rebuilt it all to solve that problem with an ini file where you can set like 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute increments. You can skip between levels, but also we rebuilt some of the systems and added things like scoring, because we kept on being told that multiplayer was huge in arcade. Obviously, Superhot VR is not multiplayer. So we decided to add, I guess, asynchronous multiplayer by having local leaderboards, global leaderboards, and having that people go with their friends to arcades to compete against each other and have fun together. And Superhot is a very lonely experience. So we wanted to add that. So yes, it is, I think, somewhat to drive people to buy the kind of main product, but it's certainly become its own thing now for us. Yeah. It's not really reflected in the revenue yet, but we're not moving away from arcades for sure. And I think what you said was right about that tail. Like ours is going to go up rather than down, yeah. Whereas generally on consumer hardware it goes down, right?
So would you say there's more of a time and an effort spent at a company level on arcades at nDreams?
So, I mean, as I said, we support the arcade and the at-home market. Primarily, we are a kind of home consumer VR company. You know, as I said, we've done 10 titles. We just announced kind of Phantom Covert Ops. Yeah. That's coming kind of for the Quest as well. So, I mean, that's where our kind of core focus is. But we also see kind of out-of-home and location-based as a kind of really important part of the market. Touching what Callum said in terms of, say, with something like Shooty Fruity, I think it's two-way. IP is really strong. It's really important with an IP. So if you have a strong IP that works for the home consumer market, that's really going to translate to the arcade market. Then it's a case of kind of, well, does that fit? But and how do you adapt that IP to make sure that it works within the arcade kind of space? But we're seeing revenues, but again, it's like it is a long. It's kind of a long-term kind of project in the arcade market because it is a really young kind of, it's early stages and there are so many different areas. We're looking at Free Roam, obviously the backpack experiences, but it's also changing. There's a reason. There are lots of, when you come to the arcade market, there's lots of different considerations. And it is a retail business and it's a completely different consumer. So the chances are that the consumers that are going to the arcades aren't the same consumers that are at home playing your game. So, but in a year's time, when they have bought into VR and maybe bought a home setup, then they'll know the game, they'll remember the game. So, there's a little bit of a kind of long play on it, as well as kind of a short-term kind of growth in the arcade sector itself.
Are there any successful VR companies only making content for arcades? Like, I can't think of any. All the big ones that I know, either like Servios, I guess it's slightly different, but all the big ones make at-home games for people to buy on PSVR, etc. Right?
I don't think there's a combo where you're building original IPs and they're only going.
Right. That's
but
what
I think
mean.
there's service companies who are focusing on kind of amusement parks and other kinds of properties there, and just kind of building out content that don't do at home. Yeah. But.
I think amusement parks and theme parks is again a slightly different area as well because they are the masters at kind of throughput and kind of revenue or profit per square foot, and obviously one of the biggest costs for the arcades is the human cost of attendees, and time to put 100 people into a kind of big VR experience versus putting 100 people on a roller coaster. Is completely different. Yeah,
I think you're right. That's a style of content for a different industry, which is the amusement industry. And I think, up here, representation is companies within this new medium of building within virtual reality from the ground up. So I guess for that, I think a lot of people are either considering getting into the space or moving into a VR market and are wondering what kind of size team and what kind of budgets can lead to a sustainable business. So, the advice I've always given is that we have to grow at the size of the industry versus kind of outpacing it. Because if you built a 200-person team today and put $50 million into a title, you're just, you're destined for not making that back. Where do you two see? What are the stats on your companies in size and amounts that you're spending per game, and do you think that that's going to increase year over year, or where do you see that going?
I think Superhot VR has had multiple teams working on it for various ports, etc. But I think it's always been under 10 people, the people actively working on the game. But Superhot, The company is also called Superhot. I'm sorry, it's very confusing. Superhot, the company, is between 30 and 40 people now, and that covers a lot of kind of QA people, ops people, etc. So they also touch the game. So I would argue that Superhot VR was made by a core team of 6 people, but it probably grew to maybe 10 to 12, 15, if you start counting other people around that as well. The Quest port, for example, which included realistically no new content from a design point of view as such, even that had 8 to 10 people at Superhot working on it for almost a year. So it definitely takes people to make these. Beat Saber, I think, is like 6 to 8, something like that as well. But again, it depends if you're talking about core team making the game or like everyone around it, which is also included. So
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, Tutti Frutti was around 15 people. I think what you touch about in terms of kind of growing with the market is kind of a really important point, because kind of consumer expectations are going like that, but actually the market itself is still growing like that. So somehow you've got to kind of get creative design to be able to kind of bridge that gap and deliver the kind of fidelity or the kind of unique or innovative experiences that are going to keep them happy, but without kind of trying to match that in terms of spend.
that's such a good point about consumer expectations. Like you look back at the launch of Rift, or even pre that with DK1, DK2 with Share, like people just wanted to see cool stuff in VR.
Yeah.
Now, like we launched Superhot VR on Quest, and we're getting requests for like different save files and all of that. It's stuff that we probably should have in the game, but it's now become, it's not just the VR hardcore fans who want to check out cool stuff in VR. It's like people want legitimate, full blown game experiences with all of the things that they're used to with cloud saves and save files and restart points and all of that sort of stuff. So we're actually seeing definitely a new market with Quest of I guess normal gamers as versus to like VR gamers, and the expectations, as you said, are much higher.
So if you're seeing higher demand and more, demanding customers, and people want longer form content and more to consume because they ran through all the content that they bought immediately, how do you square that circle with, people who are saying, we're in a VR winter, VR is in its dormancy for a while. How do you
So I think, I mean, particularly as well off the back of kind of the Quest last week, I think we're just coming through that winter and starting, to carry on the kind of analogy and starting to see the kind of first kind of shoots. But we can't kind of get carried away because, everyone's been kind of super excited before, so we've just got to kind of temper that a little bit. But I think what Callum said there about, you're now starting to see, so what we've come out of is you start to see the talk is now outside of kind of like the VR games industry, and it's moving into the games industry. And there's people kind of talking about VR this week that 2 weeks ago wouldn't have talked about VR. And so, there are kind of probably a lot more eyes on the industry at the moment, and, that can only be a good thing. And so we've got to kind of go with it. But yeah, I wouldn't get, it's not, I'm not ordering a speedboat.
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone has been in this VR winter though. Like I've always talked about this, that there's, what I hope happens with the launch of Quest and over the next kind of 2 to 5 years is right now you have like maybe 10 games earning about this much, and then after that there's like a super sharp drop off. And I think those top games, whatever they may be in whatever year, that will continue to rise in the amount that they get. But what I hope is that like cliff just starts to even out a little bit and become more of a bell curve, because right now it's some games which would probably find a success if they weren't in VR are just not being able to make that cut, because you buy a new headset, you go and spend $150, you spend those $150 on the games that people are talking about. It's everyone else who might find the hidden gems. So for me, there's definitely been a lot of success in VR. We've talked publicly about our numbers, but it's that sharp drop-off that I hope starts to even out so that it's a level playing field.
So do you think the drop-off is based on discoverability? Do you think there's content out there that people are going to the stores and not seeing because the store doesn't highlight or allow for search better? And then also, what are your thoughts on the console-style launch of the Quest and limiting it to certain
I think the drop-off is like 3 things. One is there are so few like obvious games that the press and players and Reddit tells people to buy.
Yeah.
So they're just, whether they're promoted on the store or not, they're the games that you hear about. Like in LA right now, Oculus has like 20-foot billboards promoting Beat Saber, right? You're going to buy a Quest, you're probably going to buy Beat Saber. So that's one, is like limited funds for each person, so they buy the top and then the rest fall off. Two, and this is not about everybody, but there's definitely a quality fall off as well. Like people aren't able to have large enough teams because investment dried up, or they don't have funding from previous games. So the finished quality of the games sometimes leaves something to be desired. I actually can't remember my third point. So what was the second part of your question?
Curation on the stores.
Curation? I think curation is pretty great. I think Oculus have made a couple mistakes in games that I know they haven't let on their store, which I think is a shame. I'll just call them out. Loco Dojo, I think, is great. It's like pretty unknown. It's by a small developer, but it's Mario Party in VR. Seems like that'll be perfect for Quest. So I hope that Oculus end up opening that up somewhat. I think the days of Oculus Share are long gone. Whether that's good or bad, I'd like to find like a hidden experimental menu within Quest to be able to play weird shit from weird devs, but I understand the console requirement, and I don't dislike it as such. It doesn't harm someone like Superhot.
Yeah.
I think as the kind of ecosystem grows, then it will, again, as Callum says, allowed to it will sustain pockets of kind of niches or kind of innovative kind of smaller games. But yeah, naturally at the moment, again, if you buy the headset or buy the HMD, you're gonna go to the kind of the games that everyone is talking about. The same games that are kind of up there now are the same games that were up there kind of last year and probably the year before. So and naturally, yeah, you're gonna go. You buy a Quest, you're gonna buy Beat Saber initially. So
yeah. I was going to ask for the philosophies of designing and creating content. When you're thinking of a new IP, what's the process for coming up with what you want to see in a headset?
I'm going to let you answer this because all our IP is Superhot.
I was going to say, I'm the biz dev guy, so I'm not really on the creative side, but yeah, we allow kind of ideas to bubble up and kind of come from the teams.
Do you do game jams to?
Yeah, so the team, so we have kind of internal processes where anyone can kind of put something forward, and then everyone kind of has a look at it. It's not, we're pretty open on that and supportive of the teams.
Honestly, for Superhot, to kind of answer your question, kind of not. Like, we're so busy making Superhot VR a continued success that to make a new IP right now, we'd need a new team. Like it's a lot of the team that made the original game are working on kind of other things at Superhot, and the kind of VR team as it is now, which is maybe 6 to 10 people. We've just finished the Quest port. We're now going to work on rolling all of the extensive changes we had to make on Quest back into PSVR, back into PC, like all the even the optimizations and things, but also how we changed the flow of the game and things like that.
Yeah.
Once we've done with that, there's probably like other ports we have to do. Like this, it's so different to flat gaming, I guess. Like I also work at Raw Fury, as you know, which is a flat gaming publisher, and like I've never seen tales like this outside of VR. Like the tale is insane.
Yeah.
I think we made more last year than we did the year before in the game.
So I guess that's the core of the question that I'm cutting into, which is how do you could essentially take an IP and you could continue to bring it to all the new platforms that come out and continue to, I use World of Goo as my example of a game that has been, or I guess Skyrim, like it comes to every single platform and after 10 years people still continue to buy it on new places. How do you balance, I guess for others, how would you balance either continuing to add content to your one major IP, or do you continue trying to hit new IPs? With Owlchemy we did 3 separate IPs within 4 years and tried to maintain all of them across every platform. So it's just a lot to balance. And Steve, I know the IP slide, there's 10 on there. So how do you?
Yeah, I mean, so primarily now we're more kind of on the high end VR. So we did mobile in the past, but yeah, I mean, our focus is kind of more heading towards kind of AAA VR experiences.
Is that based on what you've heard the audience wants more of?
I think it's also part. So what we have built, Tom Gillow, who's our VP of Dev, he's built a AAA game studio, so a AAA VR game studio, and obviously what we do at nDreams is we have a kind of slightly blended approach. So we've got a bit of LBVR, we've done some strategic work for hire, some first party, and our own IPs. And obviously, kind of at one point, it's like, do you look at enterprise? Do you move outside that? And we didn't, because we built kind of a really strong kind of game development team. And our skill set is within games. So, yeah.
That makes
the other part of the question.
I mean, I think that answers it, and that makes total sense. But
let's talk about partnerships, if there's no questions. Because
Yeah.
I genuinely feel a lot of Superhot VR's success and nDreams' success and Owlchemy's success is a match of like good, solid game development chops with like strong partnership or BD or whatever you want to call it, support. Like I don't think you can have one without the other. I think there's maybe some outliers who just made a great game and they're terrible at working with partners and it happens to like make its way.
Yeah.
But you look at any of those, that like top game cohort I'm talking about, and I'm not including the first party Oculus titles there, but are like third party, some of them are funded, some of them are not. All of those are very, very close with Valve or Oculus or Samsung or whoever it is. And I don't think that gets talked about enough. Like it was certainly the case that when I worked at Oculus, like you have limited mind share and time to spend with developers. So the developers who are constantly talking to you and engaging with you with good content, they're the ones who are going to get all your attention. It's not really a question there, but like, did you feel the same when you were at Owlchemy? Like you made good games, but it had to be of like, you were very good at talking to partners, right?
I mean, I have to agree 100% on all that, is that, in a vacuum you can make great things and no one will know about it unless you're bringing it up and showing it and putting it on the spotlight to the right people, to the right platforms, and, trying to talk to everybody and be multi-platform was kind of a big part of that, which I guess turns into a question, which is exclusivity with platforms. What are your thoughts on that? And for someone who is trying to make it and sustain a business, where do you see exclusivity money playing into that process?
I think we've both done exclusivity. At least Superhot did, and nDreams I'm sure have as well. Like I signed Superhot when I was at Oculus, so I'm in the great position of both signing the game that I then go on to work on. It didn't, I don't know how much I can say, but it did not harm Superhot VR's future or sales in any way, shape or form. Oculus on Rift was not our highest grossing platform, even though it had been exclusive on the platform for a few months. Players were angry at the time, but that dies down. And the game would not have existed without funding. It was funny. So originally Superhot, the team, when I worked at Oculus, they told me that they didn't want the money. They wanted $50,000 to work on a prototype. Let's give us a small bit of money. We'll take a month or two, and we'll just figure out if we feel we can make a full VR game. And I said, no, Quest launches in like, Touch launches in like 8 months. Here's like more money. Just make the game. And they're like, no, like we don't want to accept money and then make something we're not proud of. And I just forced them and gave them the money. And I genuinely think the game would not have existed without that kind of backing of a platform like Oculus. In the future, would we do exclusives? I don't see why not. Like, I don't have a problem with exclusives as such. I just think it has to be done in the right way and it has to be done for the right reasons. Like, I don't think we'd do an exclusive just to take an easy payday. I don't think many devs would, but I think if we felt the future of the company or the future of the game required a certain amount of backing from a platform, then we would absolutely go ahead and do that. An exclusive doesn't always need to be the whole game, right? With Sony or whatever, if you can give them something that then, it's human nature. You give a company like Sony something that they can call exclusive, suddenly their marketing team cares more about the game at that point, because it's not just this thing that might happen, it's like we have them in a contract. Even if that contract has no money in it, it's still a contract. So Again, I think partnerships with companies are super important. Exclusives, it just depends on the game and the company. Okay,
I mean, it comes down to what's right for the products. It also comes down to kind of understanding the market that you're operating in as well. I think that's quite important. So, I mean, we have, alongside the development team, we have kind of like a publishing team. And so kind of what we do, the publishing team kind of constantly tracks the market. So we do all the research to see kind of, what consumers want. Similar to what I was saying on the kind of arcade side, but, what is it that consumers want? What are they going to want? What's working, what's not working? And then we feed that into the development team and kind of give them all the information. We don't, again, to your question earlier, we don't kind of tell them what to make. What we do is give them all the information so that they can kind of process that and then think about the things that they're making and see if there are things that they can do or what works, what doesn't.
To be clear on Superhot, like if and when we do another VR game, like my strong preference is we launch on multiple platforms because of the position that we're in. There would have to be a specific reason for us to go exclusive, which would probably be more on tech, like if one headset was significantly different or we had to do, like Quest is technically an exclusive just because it's like the others aren't out yet, just like Job Simulator was technically out before, like these games launched before Touch, etc. But I think in terms of needing the funding, we should be okay.
Yeah, and I guess you mentioned publishing. I kind of want to just maybe wrap up with thoughts on where you think in almost every mature market, publishers come in and end up taking large land grabs. And do you see that happening in VR in the near term? Do you see a massive publisher kind of taking over that space? Or do you see some of the smaller developers who've had early success helping to kind of pave that way with smaller development funds?
I mean, I think one of the things that's really nice about kind of the VR industry or kind of the VR games industry is actually, it is at such a kind of early stage that everyone will help one another and kind of share information and kind of help kind of lift everyone up. So, at the moment, kind of we're really supportive to one another. In 5 years, we may not talk to one another and kind of conversations will all be kind of really guarded. But at the moment, everyone's really supportive. So, I mean, in terms of kind of big kind of publishers coming into the market, I mean, that's down to the scale of the market and kind of what benefits can they bring or offer the developers that they maybe can't do themselves. But yeah, I mean, that comes down to scale and when you've got the kind of install base that is big enough to make that worthwhile. If it depends what your addressable audience is, and I'd say that is a little bit off at the moment.
I don't think it's going to happen soon. Like, publishers exist for two reasons outside of VR. One is funding. The other is to provide publishing services, which is a long list of QA, porting, platform submission, platform relationships, business development, a whole other list, marketing, PR, press, like et cetera, community, Discord running. Are there any big publishers who know how to do that in VR? No. Like, so why would I want to give up 30, 40, 50% of my game to insert large publisher here when they've maybe done one or two games? Like, outside of VR, sure, I'm going to give up 30% of my game to a company that shipped 200 games in the past 20 years and has made, 180 of those a financial success. Like, that makes sense. In VR, like, if I wanted a publisher, I'd probably talk to nDreams because they're a VR company who does publishing. There's not really anyone else. Like, other publishers have done stuff. Team 17, Devolver, 505, but they've all done like one thing as kind of a test and see how it went. Again, I scout for Raw Fury, a publisher, and I always say no to VR games, mostly because I don't think Raw Fury can offer the developers what they need. Like, it's also really annoying for a publisher to pick up a VR game. You get a booth at E3, you can show 5 normal games there, you can add a VR game into the mix, suddenly you're able to show one VR game. Yeah. The press is different. It's different people at Forbes, at Vogue, at CNN, at CNET, etc. Like, they have like VR writers that you now need to talk to. The community is different. The forums are different. So it's learning a whole new business for publishers. So I think it doesn't really make that much sense for publishers these days, and it also doesn't make sense for the developers. That said, I think there should be more funding in VR, like it is. You can make millions in VR. we have, other developers have, but I don't think the publishing services are really that helpful.
So I guess back to your final point, just to wrap, is, the platforms, I think, have a large, they have a footprint here, and they need to be helping developers to have that, in that symbiosis between developer and platform to push this forward. Do you think that relationship of platforms funding developers to kick this industry off will continue for the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think so. Let's be honest, it's really only Oculus and Sony at this point. HTC do investment, but there's been very little in actual kind of gaming content. No shade on you, Shane. But I don't see Oculus or Sony stepping away from that anytime soon, as long as they keep doing VR, which Oculus would make sense. But
Yeah.
Yeah, and the market is growing. To say we're at the point where the market is starting to show kind of a lot of positive signs. The Quest has opened up the conversation and kind of made, as we say, more people talk about it, and we're breaking out of that kind of VR isolation kind of chamber that we were in before, and all that is it kind of will add to that.
So you're saying there's hope.
There's always hope.
Awesome. Well, Steve, Callum, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Hey, I have a question.
Questions? All right.
It's me again. So yeah, a question about the VC community and the VR winter. So yesterday on the VC panel, they had this question from the moderator, which was a whole list of things, so AI, VR, etc. And the guests were asked to say whether it was hype or reality. And for VR, every single hand shot up. So a lot of conviction.
to say
with
that it was hype or reality?
Hype, yeah, hype. So that's, apart from being negative, it's obviously not a particularly nuanced take on the prospects of the industry. I wonder whether you guys or the companies that you know are still engaging with the VC community and what those discussions are like, whether you're aware of any sort of positive stories from existing VC investments that may not have recouped, but where the management and the creatives behaved well, reported, and did some have failed in a decent way, and yeah, I guess that's it.
Owlchemy exited pretty well to Google.
Owlchemy Labs was acquired by Google in 2017. One of the only companies that had a successful exit in the VR space, and I guess to kind of talk through investment. In conversations that we've been traveling and having conversations just openly with investors to talk through what their thesis is on the next couple of years of VR and AR and spatial computing, it appears that absolutely Silicon Valley VCs and worldwide feel a bit cool on VR as a market today, but that changes extremely quickly, and on a week-by-week basis post-Quest. I guess the kind of like VC insult I have from a high level is for people whose jobs are supposedly to predict the future, they're pretty myopic and terrible about actually predicting the future. So it really comes down to what are the current conversations formed around? And there wasn't a lot of conversation about VR prior to Quest, and now, only days later there was a lot more. And so I think it is a lot about timing, positioning, and getting a good opportunity in the eyes of investors, whereas people who are long-term committed, like we are, understand the curve and see where it's going. It's just a matter of convincing and talking to the right partner at the right time.
Yes, so we are investment-backed nDreams, but at the same time, taking kind of what you said, the companies like Sandbox VR, they just pulled down well over $60 million dollars from Andreessen Horowitz, and that was only kind of a few months ago. So also in certain sectors around the LBE and LBVR, there's some investment going in there. On the technology side, obviously, it's a part of it is a kind of retail business, not necessarily a technology business. But yeah, I think the point we're saying is that there is a lot more kind of there's a bit more talk about VR at the moment, and there's some positivity kind of in the air, but we're not getting carried away. There's still a long haul. We're not at the where we were a few years ago, where it was going to be kind of the this is it, and then kind of everything kind of just dropped. Everybody who is in it is more realistic about kind of what is ahead, and kind of we're creeping forward bit by bit rather than kind of running ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, I think actually there's a lot, the question is, well, who do you blame about for overhyping the hype cycle of the natural, hype cycle for a new technology? And actually, I think a lot of early analyst predictions that overblew where we would be in the earlier part of that curve are to blame for the investor hype cycle kind of coming a little too high and then a little too low post. So again, talking to developers in the trenches, I think we're exactly where we thought it would be, but when you have someone who's trying to kind of like rally the troops and get more hype, you end up overblowing those numbers. So I think we're in a positive space, but it certainly isn't what 2016 predictions of where 2019 would be have met. I think it's a pretty linear growth curve that we're on.
I actually think there's a healthy amount of investment in the VR ecosystem. I just think very, very small amounts are spent on content creators or game developers. I think if you look at hardware companies, like before I left Oculus had bought 10, 15, 20 different companies, most of which were VC backed in some way, shape, or form. There's still companies being invested in like the last 2 weeks, like Sandbox is one example. There's some other examples as well. Like it's hard to invest in game developers because when you invest in a game developer outside of VR, you're planning for a massive funnel and massive growth, and that doesn't exist. So I don't think it makes that much sense to invest in specific growth within game developers. But in fields of which I know nothing about, like medical or construction or architecture, like there's a lot of investment and there's a lot of like strong, good companies. So if I had money to place, I'd place them on really, really smart people within the games industry, or I'd place it in the many other industries which are making a solid living and solid money in other.
Just wondering about coming back to what you were saying before about the arcades. And without a personal Alistair on board,
Can't have Alistair.
Well, we've been approached by a number of people, and I kind of just have this trust factor of saying, well, how do you actually monitor? How do you know you don't really know? So I sort of wonder if you have anything put in place in order to have some accountability from the people coming forward and wanting to license?
So we do Steam licensing, and we do, I guess it's Sandbox. Like we have 2 major partners who we funnel most things to. If we didn't have an Alistair, we'd probably end up declining a few and pushing them towards one of those 2 solutions. But I think there's a certain amount of just needed trust in there of at least they're asking to buy a key or buy a license. Like lots of them don't. And we've never gone after them because it's going to be a huge waste of time. But we've tried, even with an Alistair, which is now a phrase I'm going to use all the time, we've tried to push people towards the like 2 or 3 enterprise solutions that we work with already. I think it's Sandbox.
Was it Springboard?
Springboard, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, Springboard. So we have a partnership with Springboard, which is essentially we just suggest that people use them instead because it's so much easier for accounting and tracking and everything like that. And we can upload one build that then permeates out, and we use Steam. I think we still do direct licensing, but it's kind of irritating. So my encouragement would be to go with one of those 2 platforms or more and just try and have them manage it. It's worked out pretty well for us.
Yeah, I mean, there are other platforms as well. So, you've got the likes of kind of VR Junkies, Synthesis. They all have kind of these platforms, and you don't have to just kind of go with one. You can kind of go across them. They all have kind of royalty reporting processes. So you can cover a good amount of the market relatively kind of easily. Then it's kind of then it's a kind of more of the personal approach. So Callum has Alistair, we have Nadine. They talk. We swap stories, but then it's kind of how you build out from there and kind of where the scale is. I mean, traditionally a lot of it is North American based in terms of kind of the mom and pop arcades, because that's where a lot of the kind of platforms are already established. But there are kind of growth areas in places like France, the Nordic territories, places like that.
Viveport as well, by the way. Sorry, Viveport is another place we've started.
Well, I think that's the value of the aggregators, is that if you're going to deal with between 2 and 5 major companies, you're signing 5 contracts versus, and the audit responsibility really is on those aggregator companies to go make sure that for the 1,000 arcades that they're working with, that's being handled, because the amount of volume of requests that you get as a developer with a top piece of content saying, hey, I run a tiny arcade in insert location, it becomes completely onerous to sign individual separate contracts with all of them. So I think it's kind of all flopped out in that way, which is just pick a couple of the major aggregators.
Yeah, and just the logistics of it as well. What can you kind of handle in terms of, you're going to get questions back, there's going to be feedback, there may be things you need to do to the game or the experience to make it work and make sure it's seamless. So, can you kind of manage all that? Do you have the QA to support that? A good example with Shooty Fruity Arcade was, I said we did kind of all the, it has the auto calibration of the height settings and everything. What we found after we'd launched is we hadn't kind of calibrated it for kind of shorter players, or they were kind of skewing shorter than we thought the lowest kind of setting was going to be. So we had to kind of fix that and roll that out. Same with the controllers. We're finding some kind of users with smaller hands struggle with some of the kind of controls, so we're putting in things like automatic gun drop rather than kind of having to kind of reach and press like a trackpad or something like that. So you have to consider kind of just little things that if you want to kind of really reach the broad kind of LB audience, even within the a handful of platforms that you choose, that you're able to then kind of manage the support that you're going to need to give it.
I think Vertigo also managed a couple of other devs projects in arcades. Vertigo did Arizona Sunshine, a few others. So I know they manage, I don't want to say because I don't know if it's public, I'm really bad at that, but they manage definitely a few other devs and just do all of that for them and take a cut, which I think is again, a smart route to go if you don't want to deal with it all yourself. There you go.
Hello. Now everyone's involved. Hi. Hi, people all the way in the corner. I have another arcade question because I actually don't know as much about the arcade stuff. So VR winter, and again, we're waiting for, for things to take off more in the home market. I mean, I'm really optimistic about Quest, but there's still going to be like some time there and maybe the next iteration of hardware. For those of you doing arcades, do you have like a long-term like arcade plan? I think you were saying in your talk that your playtimes are about 10 minutes is what the arcades tend to want. So like, do you think about like putting out new content or updates, or like, is there any long-term plan for like continued arcade usage?
So we're pretty early in the cycle.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, we're, so one of the areas where there is kind of growth in the arcade market is in the 4-player rigs at the moment. Right now, the kind of 4-player rig setups like a Hologate are doing really strong, doing really well. They're kind of rolling out into FECs, that's family entertainment centers, like Andretti's and stuff in the US. And Shooty Fruity is a single-player kind of experience at the moment. So, we're not in that space. Obviously, we're looking and investigating kind of how can we take that and make it a kind of compelling kind of 4-player experience. In terms of kind of additional content, yeah, I mean, naturally we'll look at that. Also session time. So I said, we worked on 10 minutes. We're getting feedback so that sometimes actually some arcades want 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Or some want kind of just that little bit longer. Now it's because the game's a balance, it's not as easy as going, right, okay, let's just cut this off at 5 minutes or whatever. So they're all kind of sorts of considerations that we're looking at. We're looking and exploring kind of free roam VR and things like where can you take this IP or is it other IPs? So yeah, it's part of the kind of process that we're looking at. There's some, there's a whole range of market from, like we say, from the kind of mom and pops. It could be, or it could be, 2 pods in a cinema foyer, or it could be the FECs. Then you go through like to the nomadics and the voids. With the kind of full physical experiences as well, and kind of where that market will go. It then comes down to kind of what's the distribution footprint for each one of those kind of separate parts of the market, and again, is it enough to be able to kind of, how do you bridge that kind of what you can deliver and what the consumer wants, because they're paying a lot more for a kind of free roam VR experience than they are for a kind of mom and pop arcade experience.
I do want to be clear at Superhot though, like arcades are somewhat important to us in that we care about them and we're doing it, but it is no way our future is arcades versus making games for people to play at home.
Right.
Because there's just not that chance. There's not enough people or market to sell the equivalent of 20, 30, 40,000 copies of your game, or 800,000 of which we've done with Superhot VR. Like, it's just not there. So it pays for itself, and it probably makes some money. My data's a bit out of date. I looked a few months ago. But it's one of those where, like, I think it's good in general to do it. It drives people to know about Superhot. It's a good marketing tool. It does make money, and it might well grow. But, like, if you had to ask me, do I put my, like, 8-person VR team on a new arcade game or a game that we can put on PSVR, like, it would be PSVR 100% of the time. But I'd probably have one person make sure that it works on arcade.
Yeah, I think we're agreed in philosophy of how we ran our studio, which was any opportunities for dovetailing that were easy and low-hanging fruit, do it. But the main market for us was consumer at home, and then just anything that was simple, just go forward with. But I mean, we said no to tons of work for hire or contract opportunities to build custom, like, bespoke content for those kind of LBE centers, and just for us, it's going to be a ceiling on that, right?
We have this great thing at Superhot where we get asked all the time, as I'm sure you both as well, like, hey, can you support the SDK for this fucking new flying machine, or, like, you can smell VR and all this shit. And we offer them source. We're like, if you want to take a look and have a go, you can do it. And then they realize that, like, the code is 4 years old and half of it's in Polish and the other half is, like, titled by who wrote it at the time. There's, like, 5 God modes in Superhot, none of which work. The way that we score the game in endless mode is by checking every single frame how many enemies there are, and if there's less than the last frame, we add 1. Which, for anyone who knows code, is like a travesty. So it's
Do you
really,
give them the warning about the
we just like,
Polish
it's not
and
great,
all that?
take a look, see what you think. Actually, like, a couple of companies have managed to get it working, which I was pretty impressed by. Mixcast, I think, got it working, but they seem to put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it. But it's a really good way of saying no in a polite way by saying, look at the travesty that is our code base, and you try it. So.
I'm intrigued as to what VR smells like.
Yeah, There's a Kickstarter live at the moment, and they were like, "Oh, we can get Superhot." It's like, Superhot's the most sterile environment ever. It's literally a digital world. What's it gonna smell like?
Right. Was I going to say, like, ozone and glass?
Yeah,
Like,
like,
was that?
there's nothing in there that smells.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what's been said, you know, we are primarily a kind of home consumer VR developer and publisher. You know, we are we're building and kind of rolling into kind of the LB VR space, but, you know, it is just a kind of extension of the market, or, you know, it's an important part of the market as well. But, you know, we are at our core a kind of consumer VR.
Yeah. Yeah.
Quest is doing great. Like, honestly, Quest is, like, I think we're talking about it soon, but it's our best VR launch ever so far, which is crazy compared to some of the launches we've had before. Like, it's doing really, really well, and I hope a lot of devs are encouraged by that and continue to make VR or want to start making VR. Like, I saw Shams from Paradox, who I tried for 4 years at Oculus to get to do something in VR with City Skyline or something. He's like, oh, now I'll do it. It looks great. And Mike Bithell again wants to make a new VR game. Like, this is happening over and over. Of gamers who are also developers, who are also consumers, are like, actually, the Quest is like, finally, I feel like it's something I would want to play. So maybe I can make a game for it, which I think is really good. And it's backed up by sales, which is fantastic for people like us.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot easier to show people as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we have a couple in bags in the room, or at least we did last night.
I just wish the Focus had 6-DoF controllers, because then we could do that too. It does? Yes. So yeah, more like, for me, always, like, PC is I love PC, but in VR, tetherless is absolutely the future. Like, we will always support and build specifically for high-end systems, etc. But I think that the future of VR in general is definitely tetherless experiences. PC VR is not going away, and I'm a huge fan of it. I always was too. I hated mobile. Like, 3DoF, Gear VR, Oculus Go, like, it's just bad. It's not nice. Sorry, Oculus. I'm sorry. But yeah, like, 6DoF tetherless is just so much better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's changing. It's the first piece of hardware that I can recommend to a family member who's non-technical, who doesn't own a high-end PC and doesn't own all the required inputs. And it's like, just get this one thing, and it just works at the level of fidelity that we come to expect.
Yeah, and it's only going to get better, like resolution, blah, 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 like it's all just going to get better. I don't think this is it. This is not the pinnacle of VR, but it's like the first major stepping stone, I think, beyond like, the first CV1, etc. So.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.